Hey, how are you doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel here after a relatively short hiatus. We were finishing up some stuff last week with a semester of college that I was in the middle of. Now we're done with that, and here we are finding ourselves in championship week 17 here. We've made it to the grand finale for almost all of your leagues here. And we've got big matchups in store here. So some injuries this past weekend unfortunately opened up the door for some opportunities for other players to become playmakers in fantasy lineups. We've got 10 players today that are going to be those type of players you want to go out and make moves for, try and put in those waiver claims, and get rostered up here in the next week to help you make that championship push. So a lot of running back spots in particular here. We had a couple season-ending injuries as well as just some banged-up running backs that might miss either just next week or week 18. They could potentially be back for the NFL playoffs. But for our fantasy purposes, there are now doors opened and opportunities presented to us here again in week 17. So one more time, 10 names up on the board today. Let's hit the intro and let's get started. Here we go. So I must say, week 16 was quite the adventure for us here. Obviously, there is still Monday Night Football to go, but the Sunday game slates were wild. The Saturday games were pretty good as well. I was able to head over to Lambeau Field and check out my Packers taking on the Browns. That was a good experience on Christmas Day. Nearly choked, but thankfully Baker Mayfield had one last interception, his fourth of the day, as a nice Christmas treat for me. So with that being said, from a fantasy lens, Rex Burkhead comes out this week, goes absolutely nuts. You would have thought this man was Jonathan Taylor with his 27 points in the Texans matchup, knocking off in a quite convincing fashion the Los Angeles Chargers. That was a weird game if you sat down and watched that one. The Texans' physicality, they really controlled that game. And despite the fact that the Chargers had some guys step up to the plate, we'll talk about Justin Jackson a little bit later in the video, Rex Burkhead was a force to be reckoned with. I mean, like I said, Jonathan Taylor-like numbers here. 22 carries, $149, and 2 touchdowns. It was very frustrating for myself, who is a Jonathan Taylor owner in my most valuable fantasy league, you would say. The one that I place the most value on, I guess, and the one that I am most passionate about winning, or I guess however you want to go about that. It's my Dynasty League. I take great pride in the roster I built. And of course, across from me on the other side of that matchup, I have Rex Burkhead facing me, and I'm just shaking my head throughout this game as he continued to rack up point after point after point. Now, thankfully, I am still favored to win that matchup and head on to a very tough championship round. The opponent that I will likely be facing, if I can hang on that one, had T. Higgins this week, so I'm sweating a little bit, but who knows? Rex Burkhead's miraculous 27-point performance in half PPR might just get me upset here in the second round of the playoffs and knocked out. You never know, especially with those Monday games yet to be played. But Rex Burkhead, the Texans' offense, not what you would expect to typically be all that explosive, all that dependable, all that productive, but he's just owned in 23.2% of leagues. There's an opportunity for a lot of you to go out and get him. If you ended up starting him this week for some off chance, it was a good matchup. The Chargers are relatively weak against the run and don't do all that great defending fantasy running backs, but man, did he have himself a heck of a day. He did that stuff every once in a great while he was on the Bengals and then even the Patriots most recently, and then now as a Houston Texan, he's kind of taken over the lead role in that backfield. So not an overly explosive player. He does have a somewhat complete skill set. I would not expect these numbers again next week at San Francisco. It's a much tougher matchup in Week 17, but for those of you that played Rex Burkhead this week, hats off to you. You probably had a great chance to pull off the upset there. Darrel Ogunbowale there, I probably misspoke his name, and obviously being a former Wisconsin Badger, I should probably be able to pronounce that a little bit better, but the opportunity presented itself this week with James Robinson rupturing his Achilles, or actually rather tearing his Achilles in that matchup against the New York Jets. Ogunbowale is just the next man up. Carlos Hyde's on the injured reserve, and he did all right. 17 rushes, 2 receptions, 72 scrimmage yards, and a touchdown. This is one, again, where I would certainly say the talent level isn't all that phenomenal, but you are getting a starting level fantasy running back, so that in itself makes him a valuable acquisition, because if you're weak at the position, if your team ends up getting hit with COVID next week, there is the opportunity for depth and just simply that opportunity to have a team starting running back, and you never know when you can pay off or have that payoff, hence the Rex Burkhead acquisition and potential that you could have started him this past week. So you never know with fantasy. I think it's worth going out and grabbing him because of the success that J-Rob has had so far throughout his career. Again, I would not expect those level of numbers because I don't think that Ogunbowale is quite the talent or player that James Robinson is. However, James Robinson is not an elite level running back if I were to be asked that question. So opportunity here. I would manage my expectations though, but if you can acquire him, get him on the roster, that would be worth it in my book. Darrel Williams, a player who I regard a little more highly as a player. However, I think that the situation here in terms of who the actual starter will be for Kansas City is a little bit more up in the air than it is in Jacksonville. We know that James Robinson is not playing next week. However, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who left the contest in that absolute butt-kicking of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had an X-ray on his shoulder already that's come back negative, so there's going to be an MRI this morning as you're watching this video to determine the severity and extent of that injury. So maybe we won't expect him back here in the lens of Week 17. Maybe you've got yourself a Week 18 playoff continuation as well, but that would make a key difference. Nonetheless, though, Darrel Williams has had some valuable roles throughout this season, filling in for Clyde for that previous knee injury he sustained earlier on in the season. And Darrel Williams is a very capable receiving back, and that's something I think that gets really discounted in his skill set here. So Darrel Williams, a player I'd go look to add. He had 85 yards on 14 touches against Pittsburgh. Again, an absolute butt kicking of Pittsburgh. Big Ben sat and watched from the sidelines at the end of that contest. So an ugly sight for Pittsburgh fans, but obviously Darrel Williams, if you've got him, you can pick him up in fantasy. He is owned in over 60% of leagues, but just became a bit more valuable of an ad here. Boston Scott, my number 4 player, he had 12 rushes, 41 yards, and a touchdown this week against the Giants in relief of Miles Sanders. So Miles Sanders, the team fears he broke his hand and is going to be out for the season. So that obviously, again, opens up the door of opportunity. That's been the name of the game here for the first 4 players. Potential injuries and missed time resulting in other fantasy assets stepping up to the plate and potentially filling roles in our lineup. So Boston Scott's a player who, he's not the most powerful back. He's a very small player. He is relatively dense, though. He is able to run through more contact than you'd expect, but he's a very capable pass catcher. The last time that Miles Sanders went out this season, I actually favored Jordan Howard because of the goal line work I expected him to get, and he actually pulled through for me there and was able to get a nice amount of rushing attempts on the goal line and punch a few of those in for touchdowns. But this week, rather, it was Boston Scott who was able to cash in, and he out-touched Jordan Howard by 3 rushing attempts on the ground. So I would say it's pretty even between the valuation of these 2 players. Next week, you never know who is going to get those goal line carries, which direction those volume and that touches are going to bounce to. It might just be Jordan Howard. So if someone in your league is going to pick up, well, obviously if you're playing a championship game next week or if you're in a semifinal for a little bit more of a unique situation, there's only 4 teams between 2 and 4 groups left in your fantasy leagues. If someone goes out there and rosters Boston Scott or Jordan Howard, and the other is still out there, it might be worth an add if you're in a deeper league or have the roster space available. And again, worst could come to worst. If it's any year, 2021 is the season to have bench depth and to stash running backs because you never know who's going to get COVID. You never know who could potentially be out and missing a game. I mean, Austin Eckler was a prime example of that this past week. Dalvin Cook out as well. We were missing some key big-time contributors for our championship game. So obviously all things that make a difference. And again, Boston Scott can contribute. He's done so throughout his career when given the opportunity. KJ Osborn, our first wide receiver on the list for today. We've got a few of them on here as well. Osborn's really developed into a productive and dependable wideout. Now, he is the slot receiver and the third option in this Vikings passing game, but he's found and developed a rapport with Kirk Cousins and really figured out a way to maintain his availability, or his productivity in this Minnesota offense. And this week, he actually outproduced Adam Thielen. Now, that's not something I expect to be the trend here. Adam Thielen is still recovering and coming back from that sprained ankle. He was able to suit up 3 grabs for 40 yards, but Osborn topped that with 5 for 68 and a touchdown. And even just a couple weeks back on Thursday night, he had that long touchdown reception against the Steelers. So you've got a complete player here, a guy who can kind of do it all. It's not an elite talent, but it is someone who is certainly capable. It feels like Minnesota just constantly churns out really good wide receiver talent. You go back to Stephon Diggs, a 6th-round draft pick, Adam Thielen being an undrafted player. Now they get Justin Jefferson. They've got a pretty good track record. KJ Osborn could just be the next list of players. He's a younger guy, so with a player like Adam Thielen, if you're in a dynasty league, a little bit off topic here, but someone to maybe stash on your bench or go pick up in the draft next season, depending on what your league format is there. But Josh Palmer here, another wide receiver. Again, 5 grabs, 43 yards, and a touchdown, so nothing astronomical. These are not the number one options in their offenses, but they're very capable players, and when they get opportunities, they tend to capitalize on them. Josh Palmer is no different from Tennessee. Really liked him coming out of college. I like his skill set a lot. Good route runner, can win at the catch point. And again, just an overall talented player. I think that had he not been serving as the 3rd or even 4th fiddle in this offense to Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Jalen Guyton for most of the season, I think we could start to see some more productivity out of him after he gets more snap percentages or gets higher amounts of the snap percentage and gets more incorporated into the offense in 2022. So another name to keep your eye on if you're in a long-term fantasy league. But certainly here, as far as Week 17 goes, Mike Williams hit the COVID list. He's out, I believe it was 10 days. So that could potentially extend and cross over into Week 17 and open the door for a nice flex level player if you're playing a 1 or 2 man flex league. So again, another sneaky asset to go add on the waivers. Ronald Jones from Tampa Bay, obviously another name who a lot of players added last week. However, he is still owned in under 80% of leagues. So if you ask me, I think that needs to be at 100%. The matchup this week is the New York Jets in Week 17. That's a league winner, man. I mean, if there was any matchup on paper you want, it would be the dead last, worst-ranked New York Jets rushing defense in a game where the Buccaneers should just absolutely stonewall New York and give them a run for their money. So I think Rojo could be a top 12 level RB producer in Week 17. He needs to be rostered in all leagues and probably started in 90+% of them, depending on how loaded your RB core is. So I like this one a lot again. The availability is not as widely accessible as some of the other players on the list for today's episode are, but in terms of the value and production he could give you, he might just be the best when we look at the opportunity that we have here in championship week. And Amon Ra St. Brown, back to the wide receiver position, he notched. This might be the most high priority player at the wide receiver position in today's ads. However, he has been picked up in a large percentage of leagues. After the last month, he's been having great production. He's been doing some great things for that Detroit Lions offense. He just notched his 4th straight 11-plus target game. And in every one of those 4 games, he's got 11 or more points in half PPR, scoring 91 yards and a touchdown this past week. He is establishing himself as the top dog, the top option, the go-to player for this Lions offense. Even without Jared Goff on the field, Tim Boyle in an absolute battle. The Lions were really in that one for the entirety of that game, lost a tough 20-16 game against the Falcons, but they have established him as their go-to player in the passing game without T.J. Hawkinson and without DeAndre Swift on the field. Amon Ra St. Brown has been a safety valve and a productive player in that slot wide receiver role, and he can even get out there in space and do some nice things as well. So if you're looking for a flex player to potentially have to start this week, I wouldn't look any farther than Amon Ra St. Brown. He is our 3rd receiver we listed in today's episode, but we don't tend to really rank these players in any particular order. We just toss out names, and depending on what your guys' team needs, we will help you with that in the comment section below. You can let us know what you've got, what you're looking for, and we'll help you with those add and drop scenarios. So drop those down in the comment section below. Let us know if you got a win this week and are advancing into the championship round of fantasy action. So exciting stuff here as we move into Week 17. Again, Monday Night Football tonight. As we finish up the semifinals and Week 16, we do have a couple more names on the list for today, including Rashaad Penny of the Seattle Seahawks coming back on the list here. Just a week after it looked like DJ Dallas was kind of scraping into his volume, into his workload, and when it was going to be a little bit of a nuisance here, then Rashaad Penny comes back this week with 17 rushes, a $135, and a touchdown. So a strong recovery performance from Penny after a quieter game last week against the Rams. He out-touched DJ Dallas with just 4 rushing attempts in 15 yards. He also added another 4 receptions for 23 yards to the air, but again, it is significant that Penny out-touched him by over 4 times in the rushing volume department. Now, the receiving volume is a completely different story here, but Penny is proving that he does have some value. He can be a top 24 play at the running back position through the next 2 weeks here, and potentially a player that has some lineup serviceability here and some lineup utility for us. So Penny, a lower end RB2 as it is, but someone, again, who can still have that lineup value. And then Justin Jackson here. This is another one where, kind of like a Darrel Williams, you're not 100% certain that they're going to be the starter for their team this week. They're going to get the full workload for their respective offenses, but Justin Jackson went absolutely bananas. If you look at the raw stat sheet and put up an Austin Eckler game and this Justin Jackson game, you would think it was the same player. You would think that Austin Eckler didn't miss a beat and was out there doing his thing. And it was Justin Jackson who had 8 receptions on 9 targets for 98 yards receiving. That's an impressive marker. I've loved Justin Jackson since he came into the league. He's a very, very smooth rusher. He's a very dynamic player. And he's a great reserve running back to have on an NFL roster. So the Chargers were in good hands here. He added another 11 touches for 64 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So he got the job done. 29 fantasy points, was among the best in fantasy football. We said at the top of last week when he made our waiver wire ad for Week 16, this was going to be a week-winning and potentially league-winning asset to add. It almost kind of redistributes the wealth. If you were one of those lower-seeded playoff teams and you had a higher waiver order than, say, the 1 seed or that team that entered with an absolutely loaded roster, this was kind of your equalizer. You might see some upsets here because last week's waiver ads were so valuable that you could have went out and gotten a Justin Jackson. So that's the awesome part of fantasy football. That's why we play. I was, like I said at the top of the video, I was like I don't think I mentioned this part, but I was a 45-point favorite, I want to say it was, in that Dynasty League where I was up against Rex Burkhead and company. And now I'm like a 15-point favorite here. And there's the potential that I could lose that game. They've still got Devontae Parker to play. Now, obviously, when his numbers are all said and done, I am supposed to win by a 15-point cushion, but you never know what might happen. I might just get bounced right on out of the playoffs and be sent home because of, you never know what's going to happen. And there's a million different things and ways that these games can play out. Game scripts can get altered, players can get injured, all that good stuff. I had Miles Sanders go out in my lineup and score me virtually no points. They had like 5 points on the day, so craziness here in Week 16. And again, some of the reserve running backs and waiver wire ad pickups from last week were our most valuable and productive players on teams for Week 16. So it's funny how that stuff all plays out, but that's the fun of fantasy football. That's why we love it so much. And what makes it such a great game to play. So, yeah, I'll see you guys in the outro. All right, you guys, thanks so much for tuning in today. If you're new around here to the SFS channel, drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. We'll be posting lineup advice and suggestions for Week 17 championship week of fantasy football here all throughout the week and helping you guys set your lineups heading into those big games. We'll also be trying to make some rendition of a fantasy football award show later in the week, so I'll be putting out polling on YouTube and in the community Discord for awards like biggest draft bust of the season, obviously team MVP, most valuable pick of the draft. I'll have to rename that because that can't be MVP as well, but the best value pick of draft season, all that good stuff. Best quarterback, running back, wide receiver, whatever it is, we'll make a lineup and an official poll for you guys. So go out, answer some questions, and let us know who was the best players for your team this season. We'll have some great offseason stuff as well. Like we'll be running through the best possible fantasy draft of the 2021 season. Lots of dynasty content and all other things. We'll be getting into some prop betting hopefully as well, and a lot of fun stuff. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, drop down, leave your questions about your teams and any roster moves you're looking to make, and I'll be happy to help you guys out with that. And I'll see you there. Peace out.